The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership. I'm Brent, Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcast articles and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. You're listening to a Truly Human Leadership podcast refresher, where we reshare insight from podcast episodes from the past. One of the biggest challenges Barry-Wehmiller faces as a company is how to grow and sustain our culture of truly human leadership and our growing organization. As of this recording, we're a $3 billion plus company with more than 12,000 team members in over 200 locations around the world. We've acquired more than 100 companies, and we're growing every year. It's a massive job to try to make people across the entire organization feel the culture we work hard every day to create and foster within our company. Rhonda Spencer is Barry-Wehmiller's Chief People Officer, and it's her main job to be the steward of our values and make sure that light shines to the furthest reaches of the organization. Rhonda has a very interesting story. She's been with Barry-Wehmiller more than 20 years, starting as an engineer. And this was long before our guiding principles of leadership were written or even thought of. Rhonda's leadership journey in our company parallels the evolution of our company culture. Rhonda joins the podcast this week to talk about those journeys and also to talk about the nuts and bolts of how the bigger ideas of our CEO, Bob Chapman, were put into action. She also talks about how Barry-Wehmiller came to have a Chief People Officer and what that position means to her. So now, here's Rhonda Spencer.
So when I started at Barry-Wehmiller, it was kind of like the Wild West. It was early days. We had done the pneumatic scale acquisition before I got here, which really was the beginning of the modern journey of Barry-Wehmiller. And I was hired into Barry-Wehmiller Design Group as a mechanical engineer at a time when we were doing a lot of projects in Mexico. So I got to spend my first 6 months working for the company, living in Mexico and helping to build breweries, which was an interesting experience because didn't feel like they had ever heard the word ingenier, and certainly had not ever seen a blonde lady in person in Navajo, Mexico. So it was an interesting journey, not the least of which was the fact that I didn't actually know what I was doing at all. So anyway, I survived, but that's how I got here.
You started out in design group, but how did your leadership journey kind of begin?
Not well. So really there weren't a lot of people who knew what they were doing in Barry-Wehmiller at that time. And I had someone who was in theory going to be my leader, but I really didn't even speak to him for months. And so it was very challenging in terms of a sense of not even having a sense of security that you knew what you were doing or that people thought you knew what you were doing. And so it's interesting. We talk all about leadership, but one of the most important turning points on my leadership journey was after I left Mexico, and pretty sure they probably said, this girl probably needs to be fired. And they sent me to work on a project at Pepsi for Robin Pikey, who's one of the partners in the design group today. And she just said, you're going to be in charge of the syrup room. This is what I need you to do. And I thought, thank God, somebody who knows what they're doing. I'm like, just tell me what to do and I will do it. And so it's interesting when you think about today, we talk a lot about responsible freedom, but there was a little bit too much freedom and not enough like, what am I supposed to do to be responsible in those early days? So to me, it was really that first experience of leadership about somebody who really engaged with me and helped me to try to make a valuable contribution. And so that was really for me the first really experience of leadership.
Mm-hmm. Coming from design group, how did you get from design group to corporate Barry-Wehmiller?
So back then, I always joke that Barry-Wehmiller, if you had a brain, a pulse, and ambition, not necessarily in that order, people would just let you try things. And it's really something that shaped what I think about what Barry-Wehmiller should be today, is people would just give you chances to do things. And so I was working in the office doing proposals for the design group, and Phil Ostapovich saw me doing that. He said, do you like what you're doing? I said, oh, I love it. And so he said, great, that can be your job now. And so I ended up working in inside sales and sales administration, and then again, just asked the question, I never thought about myself being in inside sales before. I said, what's the career path? And my leader at the time said, well, what do you want it to be? And I said, well, I'd love to have a sales territory. And then the next thing you know, Phil's like, you can have a sales territory. So they gave me the territory that stretched from Ohio to Wyoming and then Chicago and north, and to do everything that Barry-Wehmiller had to offer at the time, including the design group. And so it was somehow I was successful. Well, a funny story about part of why I was successful is that at the time, Bob Chapman, Phil Ostapovich said, I'm going to put her in sales. And Bob said, I don't think a woman can be successful in sales in our industry. And Phil he was really known for a lot of things, one of which is his stubbornness. And he's like, I'm going to make darn sure that she is successful. And so with his help and getting off the ground, and we had just such a rich history. Pneumatic Scale had such a great history in the Chicago area, which was the heart of my territory. And the design group had something that was very new to offer at that time. And so I found myself in a lot of success and ended up to be the top salesperson for every year that I was in sales in those early days. And then we moved the Pneumatic Scale facility into Akron, Ohio, where it is today. And as part of that, we lost our leader in sales, who was one of the founding members of Pneumatic Scale, the Doble family. And so we knew we were going to get a new leader, but we were all like 27 years old. There was a whole group of us that were hired in at the same time in sales. And so we were just waiting for them to hire someone to be our boss. And again, Phil, he said to me, meet me in the front conference room. I'm like, what? And he goes, I'm pushing you for the VP of sales job. And I thought, what? I said, I can't do that. And so he said, no, I think you can. Everyone thinks you can do it. And so he really helped, because it was outside of his organization at that time. And so he helped position me for that role. And that's how I ended up being the vice president of sales for North America when I was 27 years old.
Wow. How long were you in that role?
I was in that role for about 4 years, and it was really crazy time. So Barry-Wehmiller grew a lot during the time. And after our oldest daughter Isabel was born, I really felt like I needed to do something more flexible. And I was, it's interesting, I don't really think about the modern journey of the culture of Barry-Wehmiller. People say, what was it like back then? I say, well, it was a decent place to work, probably better than most, but it really didn't have a special culture. But there really were the foundations of special people and things that they believed that were part of the company at that time. And so I just went to Tim Sullivan, who was my leader at the time, and said, Tim, I need to do something different. And he goes, I think you're going to have to talk to Bob about that. And so I went and talked to Bob, and he said, fine, let's try an experiment. And so I started working with Bob, and it was the perfect time, because I think part of why I felt the need to leave the role is because we had a lot of conflict. We had outgrown our approach to sales. And so I had the opportunity to join Bob and a small group of people and really reimagining how we would approach sales in the organization. And that was foundational because it was the first time we ever stepped back and just painted a vision for the solution to a problem and then said, what would it take to actually bring that vision to life? And so to me, that was a turning point, not just for me personally, but also just to take kind of a way that Bob thought about things in the world and start to turn that into some discipline and process. So that to me is kind of a turning point, because up until that point, I think that Bob was really just such a force in the organization. We always joke that if this was the Wizard of Oz, Bob is not the wizard, he's the tornado. And so in that role, I had the chance to take some of his brilliant ideas and start to put shape around them and start to make them actually organizational systems that were sustainable. So that was really a turning point for me personally, to kind of step into work that was so far from what I had done as an engineer, but then also that was the first connection of working directly with Bob.
I'm curious to know, did you have personal career goals at that point? What did you think your future would hold for you?
Oh gosh. The only thing that shaped where I was going at that point was a personal belief that I had about who I was supposed to be in the world. And that was, one time Bob just flopped in my office in the chair across from my desk, and he said, what do you hope to be with the time you have on the face of this earth? And what does that have to do with working at Barry-Wehmiller? And so for me, I knew the answer. Very shaped by the thinking of Francis de Sales. And he says, be who you are and be that well. which to me means you're given gifts and talents, and the way that you honor those gifts and talents is by using them to the fullest and to try to be whatever it is that you're meant to be in this world and live up to that. And so I really wasn't shaped by thinking that I'm going to go on some path from A to Z in my career, but just this idea that opportunities are going to present themselves and you need to make the most of those and use your gifts to help make a positive impact. And for me, that wasn't just here at Barry-Wehmiller, it was also as a wife and mother. As part of why I made the choices that I made is because there's a lot that I have to give to this world, and some of it belongs at Barry-Wehmiller.
So what was the next opportunity that presented itself at that point?
So really, it just was an evolving journey with the work that we were doing with Bob. And so after a couple years, he said, I love what you're doing. Why don't you hire some people so that you can stay part-time? So we started to build a team of people that could do this work and shape those systems. And it really went from doing some stuff and having an interesting response to it, and realizing for the first time that if we're different as leaders, people are different in response. And so those were the foundations of Barry-Wehmiller's journey. And a big turning point for us was stepping back and trying to figure out what it was that was going on and bringing some people together to talk about it. And the result of that was the guiding principles of leadership.
People, when they think that they're decent, when they think that, I'm just a nice person, they don't really get very much farther than that, because sometimes they think that's all there is. How do you get to that? How did you get to that next step?
Well, if you think about, I came to Barry-Wehmiller in 1991. So I think if you could work at a company that didn't generally lay people off and that you were treated reasonably well, and you had a lot of opportunities in front of you. I mean, who would have thought, you say, what's your career path? Well, I didn't plan to be a vice president of sales at 27, that's for sure. So it's, what do you have to complain about, right? So there wasn't, and I think anybody who kind of came into the working world when I did, our expectations weren't that high, right? You wanted to have a good job, make some money, progress. But I don't think that we expected to that much out of the culture at work. And so what happened at Barry-Wehmiller is that Bob has a practice of wanting to step back and figure out what's going right. So when we tried some things and they had a reaction that was different than what we expected, we would stop and ask people, what's happening here? And really talk to them about, what are we experiencing, and how did it make you feel? And Bob would ask people questions like, well, what do you tell your family when you go home at night about this experience that you had? And so just really asking some questions out of genuine interest, and then listening to those reactions, but then also just stepping back and saying, what's happening here? What is it that's going right? And the idea that we might have stumbled onto something here that's interesting, and that time we didn't know it was actually precious. And then, let's try to figure out what that is to see if we can replicate it and expand it. And so it was really very accidental, and it came out of just a curiosity about what it was that was happening. And that was really bolstered by the fact that we acquire so many companies. We invite a lot of people and organizations to join our family and join us on this journey. And so you can have something that happens once and you can say that's interesting. But if you get a chance to kind of go and do that experiment again, and people respond the exact same way, you have a bit of a lab where you can say, wow, it turns out that it wasn't just the people in Duncan, South Carolina, or the people in Baltimore, Maryland, but people everywhere seem to want and respond to the same things. And so I think that's part of what gave us the courage and really gave us the ability to see things differently than what we'd ever seen before.
Well, and at the same time, Bob's having all these kind of, the tornado is happening. Mm-hmm. He's having all these revelations and things that he's thinking about. And it's interesting to me that, and it's very Barry-Wehmiller that, he's got this big idea, then we have a team that turns that idea into action, which is kind of amazing. And that doesn't happen in very many organizations.
Probably has something to do with the engineer, right? It's like that, then you all of a sudden apply this sort of systems thinking and process thinking to say, well, that's nice, but we don't just want it to happen once. And so I think maybe that's where the engineer comes out. And it so turns out that the first person that I hired to join me on my team was also an engineer. And so that, I think it just kind of comes from that systems thinking and discipline, and how do we deploy and scale these ideas, and just to think that nothing happens anywhere without some kind of system or structure to sustain it until it becomes just ingrained behavior.
When the guiding principles of leadership were written, what did that do to the company? How did things change after that?
It really raised the bar. And so I think the fact that when you put something, and because of the way we did it and we didn't really think about what was going to happen with it, we just went away to have a conversation about what was happening, and we came away, people started talking and I just started typing, and we ended up with some kind of truths that we all agreed on about the way we would want a place to be to work. And so that was fun, and we typed them up and we sent them out by email and got back, and somebody sent me back Enron's value statement, and it said, there's no place for ruthlessness here, right? And so it's kind of interesting that, and Bob said, well, we're going to take those off the wall and we're going to put them into the hearts and minds of people. But when you all of a sudden have this very, very aspirational set of ideas about what a culture is supposed to be like, you've created quite a challenge for yourself organizationally, because we started to wonder what if this could be our culture, and eventually moved to promising that it would be our culture. And that cracked open a whole lot of challenge and work. And then if you think about, probably 90 acquisitions later, and how do you make sure that you are that for the people at the very edges of the organization on the worst day? And that is a daily challenge, because every single day you have a chance to fall short, and all we can do is wake up and try to be better.
When all this was going on, a lot of it was a result of just being open to the experiences. It wasn't a master plan behind it. But if you think back to that time, did you feel like it was a turning point, or did you feel like it was something special? Speak to that.
Not really. I mean, I think you can look back in hindsight and understand where the inflection points are in your journey. But when you're in it, you're just going along and doing stuff, right? So it wasn't, I think we never really were purposeful about what the end game was going to be or what we were going to create. There was somewhere along the way, and I know when Bob talks about his own story, he talks about sort of a series of revelations. There was somewhere along the way that we got better and better at making the implicit explicit in the organization, and being purposeful about teaching and creating and supporting this idea that was really growing in the organization. So looking back, you can see where the inflection points were. But at the time, I think we just thought we were growing a company and growing a culture. And, one thing that I will say that happened that along the way is that we had this aspiration at one point to think that we could get to be a $100 million company. And to think that that was a big goal for us as a $3 billion company today is pretty funny. But it did feel like that was a bit of a turning point, because we got enough critical mass that it felt like we weren't spending all of our energy just trying to get the company going. Or, we sometimes use the analogy that when you're taking off in a plane, it takes the full force of the engines to get off the ground. But you get to some point and it's a little bit more, you're at cruising speed and you can kind of pull back a little bit. So I do feel like a lot of this, coincidentally, or it was allowed to happen at the point where the company got some bit of a critical mass where you weren't just taking care of the most mundane issues on a day in, day out basis.
Well, one probably kind of intentional thing to sustain things was the creation of the university. And that would have probably been, with the growth of the people team to kind of help build these efforts and sustain these efforts, that was probably a big, important part of that as well.
Yeah, I think when we started down our lean journey, it was really with the idea that we wanted to create a fulfilling experience for people who were part of the company. And so there were a lot, in those days you couldn't really be a manufacturing company and not be thinking about the fact that you're going to need to do something to make sure that you could have a sustainable manufacturing company, manufacturing from Green Bay, Wisconsin, or Akron, Ohio, or even now, France or Germany. And so we knew that that was something we needed to do, but we wanted to take a very different approach towards it, which was to say, this is going to be about reducing people's frustration at work, not about waste elimination, which is the typical focus of a lean journey. And so as we started down that, we recognized the number one thing that we needed to do was to build leaders who understood the cultural journey that was happening and also that continuous improvement journey that was happening. So really we founded the university with an idea of how do we build a sustainable way to live out this vision that we were creating. And so that was a turning point for us, is to begin to try to, one, sort of codify what it was that we were doing and then start to teach it.
The people team had been growing, and we'd had different parts of the people team joining, like the university. What was actually your role in the company at that time? Like, you were just VP of...
I was Director of Organizational Empowerment.
Okay.
So that was just, like the title I have now, just a made-up title of a made-up team that basically did continuous improvement and the university and the cultural journey. So that was really the team that we built up, was delivering on that.
And who did you go to? Like, how did you know how to do that?
Oh, yeah. When we did our first set of classes, we went to the people in Barry-Wehmiller. So we just actually started and said, what's the be, know, and do of a Barry-Wehmiller leader? And we just probably had 500 Post-it notes up on the wall of all the stuff that Barry-Wehmiller leaders should be, know, and do. And we boiled that down. We decided to focus on frontline leaders. And really, that's where culture happens. We can say whatever we want. We can put whatever we want on the wall. But my culture at Barry-Wehmiller is how my leader treats me. And so we decided to start there. And we just asked the people who were thought to be great frontline leaders and really what it is that you do, and started there. So that was and so when we did our first leadership fundamentals class, I'm sitting in the pilot next to Bob, and he is impressed, and he leans over and he goes, "Did you guys just make this shit up?" I'm like, "Yeah, we did." We just went out there to the best of read everything we could, met everyone we could, and kind of pulled in the best of what we thought the thinking was and what our own best frontline leaders were telling us was important, and sort of pulled together something that felt like it fit for us.
You were crowdsourcing before it was...
Before it was a thing.
Before it was a thing.
How did listening become such an important part of our university, of what we taught and what we tried to teach leaders?
One of the things that Brian Wellinghoff had the idea early on, that fundamentally we needed to teach communication skills. And so we had started off on a process to develop a fundamental communication skills course. And we met David Vandermolen along the journey, and he came to us with some really unique ideas about what that was. And so a lot of his thinking and things that he'd been exposed to were infused into that initial communication skills course. So Bob had been talking about listening in the context of asking people in the organization questions and listening to their answers. And he said, if you ask the right questions, you're going to learn a lot. So he started that process of listening early on, and it's really what shaped the journey. But in terms of taking that broader into the organization, David also brought it in, the skill of listening, and into our communication skills course. And so we're trying to develop a course that would be a foundation for people to learn all the other things we thought they needed to learn to be good leaders. And the feedback from the course started coming back, and people said, well, it changed my life. And Bob was listening to them talk about listening, and really they're saying, no, I'm a better parent. It's changed my marriage. Or people would say to us, if I had these skills, I wouldn't be divorced. And so it really was something that had an impact way beyond what we thought. And so it was something that was natural to us as an organization, and then became one of the foundations of what we're teaching.
Now, I know you said that former title, Director of Organizational Empowerment, is just a made-up title or whatever, but I think it was around the time I got here, so about 5 years ago was when you were actually made Chief People Officer. Mm-hmm. And that may be kind of a made-up title, but I think it actually means something. I mean, why did that happen, and why did they choose to call it that?
And why then?
So we had a leader of our HR organization, which we call Culture and People Development, and he was retiring, and I was asked to help in the search for his successor. And being an engineer, I never really thought of myself as somebody who could run what I would consider the technical side of HR. And so I was recruiting for his successor, and I had a really two interesting experiences back to back. I had we met on our journey, Sri Kumar Rao, and he teaches a class called Creativity and Personal Mastery. And so he said, you should come and check out my class. It might help people in Barry-Wehmiller. And so I did. It was 3 weekends in Long Island. It was an interesting class because he had just spoken to a New York entrepreneur forum. And so a lot of these really edgy New York entrepreneurs were in this class. And so that was really interesting to watch him go through some transformations. But for me personally, a lot of it were things that were very aligned. So it wasn't that jarring to me in the first couple of classes. But in one of the classes, you did a lot of personal practice, and the problem that you were confronted with was imagine, it was called alternate reality. Imagine a problem that you have that's very difficult for you to solve, and then what if everything that you assume about this problem is completely wrong, and there's a completely alternate reality where all your assumptions are untrue. So I don't feel like I have a lot of problems, so I said, well, the only problem I can think of is that I don't have time to do all the things that are important to me in life. And so my alternate reality is that I do have time to do the things that are important to me. So I had just gone through this exercise. I went to a board meeting, and we were discussing the recruiting for this new leader of HR. And one of the board members said to me, why don't you just take that job and merge it with your team? And I said, okay, because in my alternate reality, I have time for anything. And so then I told Bob the next morning, because that was over a drink after dinner. And I said, well, Bob, I think I told the board that I would take this role. And he's like, well, that's why you don't drink with the board after dinner. So we set about bringing the teams together. And it was really terrific, because we had taken organizational empowerment pretty far in the organization, but what it allowed us to do was to unleash the network of people that we have out in the organization that are at the front line of creating culture and working with leaders every day. And so our CPD teams out in the field are an amazing connection to the business, and to, not that they hadn't been tasked with building leaders and developing culture in the past, but to elevate that, be more connected to them, understand what it really takes, and to do something that's much more vibrant than it ever was without them. And so I chose my own title, and where the title came from is we met along our journey Ann Rhodes, who was responsible for the people organization at Southwest, and then later at JetBlue. And actually I think she's just retiring from her role at JetBlue, but she gave me a lot of good advice about what the role is and why you call it a chief people officer. And it's really about everything that touches the people in the organization and kind of shapes their experience here. And she also told me to have a very thin handbook and be prepared to violate anything in it if it's the right thing to do. So she's an amazing lady and somebody who really inspired me. So that was her title. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I chose the title.
And we named you Chief People Officer really before it became a popular thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you seeing in the industry?
You hear people talking a lot about the fact that people are not human resources, right? So human resources puts them at a level with raw materials and other things that you bring in to use to make your business successful. And so a long time ago, we got away from human resources and we started calling those teams culture and people development, which is what they really do. And so a long time ago, we got away from that. And so this was a natural title, and you see it becoming much more popular now, I'm happy to say, because if people actually are not just using the title, they're actually doing the job, then that's very promising for people in the working world today.
What does the title mean to you?
I feel, somebody asked me today, I interviewed someone to join our team, and she said, what do you like most about working here? And I said, well, part of what I like about working here is I got to be part of creating what working here means. And so I feel an enormous responsibility to deliver on the promise that we've made, starting with the guiding principles of leadership and through a lot of communication since then, to deliver on the promise of what it's supposed to mean to work here. And I had an experience where I got to go to the headquarters of Walmart and talk to some of the leaders there and just started out my day with learning about Sam Walton's vision for Walmart, which was, he's an amazing human being with a vision to give people a better life by giving them lower prices. And the people that I met there that were kind of doing the same work that I'm doing believe that vision, and we're working really hard to create it for people. And then I felt, why don't I feel that every time I walk into a Walmart store? And so for me, it's that idea that we can't believe just our thinking inside our bubble here in the corporate office in St. Louis, but we really have to make sure that it expands out to the actual experience of, as I said earlier, what does somebody experience at the edge of the organization on the worst day? And are we delivering on our promise? And the fact is, we can never be perfect, but it's really being passionate about that journey to get there, and to just wake up every day with a sense of responsibility for not just the culture, but also the success of the organization. Because if we don't drive forward as a vibrant organization that grows, we really won't have a chance to touch the lives of people. And I, as I've shared, was very much shaped by a vibrant and growing organization when I started here. And just, there was so much to do, there was so much opportunity that people were willing and able to take chances on me. So that's what I want for people that are part of Barry-Wehmiller. I want us to continue to grow. I want us to continue to thrive. I want us to continue to push people up the ladder before they think they're ready. And that's a huge responsibility when it comes to not just the culture of the company, but also the performance of the company. Mm-hmm.
So for some of the people that are listening that are part of large multinationals, talk a little bit about the challenges of growing this on scale now that Barry-Wehmiller is at 200 locations around the globe.
It does take systems and process and discipline. It takes challenging our own thinking about what works here might not work there. It also, there's a really fine balance between understanding that there are things that we do that are pushing the envelope, and what's real cultural difference and what's natural resistance to change. So that's the thing that we're always balancing, is that, some of the things that we do, people say, well, that's not going to work in Italy. And it's like, the people in Phillips, Wisconsin didn't think it was going to work there either, right? So we got to just challenge people to think and do differently sometimes, and that's harder the more global and dispersed the organization gets, and to just think about, are you really delivering to people in 10 languages all around the world? So there's no question that that's a challenge, but we have met some great companies along the journey that are equally committed to their culture, problem solving to the front line, all the things that are important in China as they are in their headquarters in the U.S. So we know it can be done. Those companies are out there.
Think back to your early days when you had a leader who said, what do you want your job to be? And you articulated that, and then that was your job. Mm-hmm. Is that possible these days to do something along those lines for young people? Can they, in an organization like Barry-Wehmiller, how do we address that?
I think right now we're working on a process called Know and Grow, and it's really about how do we build the capabilities within leaders to have great conversations with people about their aspirations and their hopes, and to help them understand where their strengths are, and then to start to build that journey. So I think I think we do create a lot of opportunities for people, and we want to make sure that that's equitable. How can we create equity around that people are seeing and aspiring to those opportunities? And it's easy when the company's a few hundred people for people to know you and see you. And so can you replicate that sense of being known and seen organizationally? And as we've talked about, that takes systems and discipline. So we're working very hard on that today, is to build the systems that'll create those opportunities for everybody.
You have a daughter in college studying engineering. Mm-hmm. What kind of career advice are you giving her?
Well, work hard, right? So that's not a problem. It's, starts with hard work. And so we create a lot of our luck, I think, through the work that we're willing to put in. And so I have no doubts about that one. She's an unbelievably hard worker. And to the company that you choose to join and the people that you choose to surround yourself will have more to do with shaping your ultimate life success than the job or the job title. So to me, it's just, I feel unbelievably lucky that I landed at Barry-Wehmiller 28 years ago, so that's my biggest advice to her, is just it's more about who you surround yourself with and what that company's about than the job that you take.
So do you feel like you're closer to your alternate reality now?
I'm accepting of my reality, and the fact is that it is not possible to meet the need in Barry-Wehmiller, in your life, everything that everyone needs from you. And so I think it's really about understanding what's most important and putting your attention towards the things that are most important that can make the greatest impact, and just understanding that it's not possible to be everything to everyone. And so I'm probably more accepting of that than I am living in the alternate reality where I have time for everything.
Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.